My name is Celine Vane. I'm 34 years old, and for a long time, I believed that silence was the same thing as peace. I thought that if I kept the floors polished, the bills paid, and my voice at a steady, modulated hum, the foundation of my life would remain solid. I was wrong. I didn't realize my life was about to split into a before and an after, until my husband lifted his crystal wine glass at our 5th anniversary dinner, grinning like a man who believed he'd already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. It was a drizzly Friday night in early October. Our penthouse apartment, a glass box overlooking the city's jagged skyline, smelled of expensive saffron and slow, roasted lamb. It was the kind of scent that should have signaled warmth and shared history, the kind of aroma that implies a home built on mutual respect. Instead, it felt like heavy stage makeup. It was beautiful from across the street, but up close, it was suffocating. We had 4 other couples squeezed around our mahogany dining table. The wine was vintage, the plates were artisanal, and the laughter was that specific brand of loud that people use when they aren't actually enjoying themselves. I sat beside Julian, my 32-year-old husband of 5 years. I was halfway through a glass of sparkling water, keeping my mind sharp. I'd learned a long time ago that when Julian started drinking, he started performing. And when Julian performed, someone always ended up as the punchline. Usually that someone was me. "All right, settle a bet," Marcus said from the end of the table, leaning forward with a mischievous glint in his eyes. 5 years in this city is like 20 years anywhere else. How do you two keep the pilot light on? What's the secret to the Vane spark? It was a standard, mindless anniversary question, the kind of thing people ask when the conversation hits a lull and they want to feel like they're part of a success story. I felt my ribcage tighten. I saw Julian's eyes flick toward the group, scanning his audience. He had that look, the one a comedian gets when they spot a heckler they know they can destroy. He let out a sharp, overconfident bark of a laugh. "The spark," Julian repeated, leaning back in his chair as if he owned the very air we were breathing. He gestured toward me with his glass, the red wine dangerously close to the white linen tablecloth I'd spent an hour steaming. "Let me tell you about our intimate life. It's a riot." My fingers curled around my fork. I could feel the disaster coming, the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm breaks. Julian loved attention the way a drowning man loves a life raft. Lately, he'd been starving for it. "Julian," I said, my voice low and level. It was a warning. He didn't even look at me. He never did when there was a crowd to impress. "Celine's idea of a wild night," he continued, raising his voice to ensure the people at the far end of the table could hear every syllable, "is asking me if I've remembered to set the alarm for the morning. That's her foreplay. Logistics." A ripple of laughter went around the table. It was that uncomfortable, jagged laughter, the kind people produce when they realize they're witnessing something private and ugly. But they don't want to make it awkward by staying silent. I kept my face a mask of marble. I didn't give him the flinch he was looking for. Julian leaned forward, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper. "And then, when we actually get down to it, it's mechanical. I swear it's like she's reading the assembly instructions for a bookshelf. Step 1, attach bracket A. Step 2, ensure everything is level, no passion, just protocol." The laughter got louder. Tessa, Marcus's wife, let out a high-pitched, breathy sound, her eyes wide with shock. I stared at the lamb on my plate. I could taste something metallic in the back of my throat, like I'd been chewing on a copper coin. "I'm serious," Julian went on, fully committed to the bit now. "It's the same routine, every single time. I could set a stopwatch. 2 minutes of polite affection, then exactly 4 minutes of business." He held up his hand, measuring a small space between his thumb and forefinger. "It's the most efficient love life in the tri-state area. God forbid we deviate from the manual." The men at the table chuckled in that forced way men do when they aren't sure if they should be offended on your behalf or join in on the joke. The women looked at their plates, their smiles tight and frozen. My chest didn't move. My heart rate didn't even pick up. Because the truth was, Julian didn't realize he was currently digging a hole that was exactly 6 feet deep. Every word out of his mouth was another shovelful of dirt. But the best part, Julian said, grinning as he saved the final blow for the encore, is that she genuinely thinks she's a natural. She'll look at me afterward with this proud little expression, like she's just performed at Carnegie Hall. Bless her heart, she really has no idea how much I have to pretend. The silence that followed wasn't the kind of silence that follows a joke. It was the kind of silence that follows a car crash. And then, a voice came from the left side of the table. It was Elias Thorne. Elias was a quiet man, a consultant who usually spent these dinners observing rather than participating. He sat with his elbows on the table, his eyes steady, his expression completely unreadable. He didn't smile, he didn't look uncomfortable. "That's funny," Elias said. His voice was casual, almost bored. Everyone turned to him. Julian frowned, his glass halfway to his lips. "What's funny?" Elias shrugged. "Just your description, because in my experience, Celine is actually the most incredible woman I've ever been with. No manuals, no instructions, just pure unadulterated fire." The air in the room didn't just go cold, it vanished. It felt like the vacuum of space. A fork clattered against a porcelain plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Someone took a sharp, jagged breath. Julian's face went through an entire spectrum of human emotion in 3 seconds: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a deep, bruising purple of pure rage. "Excuse me?" Julian's voice was a serrated blade. Elias didn't blink. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, looking at Julian over the rim of the glass. "I'm just saying, from personal experience, she's definitely not following any instructions. Maybe it's not the manual, Julian. Maybe it's the person reading it." Tessa's mouth literally hung open. Marcus looked like he wanted to phase through the floorboards and disappear into the apartment below. And me. I didn't say a word. I took a slow sip of my water and watched my husband's world start to tilt on its axis. Because that moment wasn't an accident. It wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the beginning of an ending that I had choreographed with the precision of a master clockmaker. Julian stared at Elias, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the stem of his wine glass. Then he snapped his head toward me. "He's joking. Tell me he's making a pathetic, sick joke." I looked at Julian. I really looked at him. I saw the man who had stood in our kitchen that morning and told me I looked adequate in my new dress. I saw the man who had been humming in the shower while he planned a future that didn't include me. And I realized that he wasn't asking me because he was heartbroken. He was asking me because his ego was bleeding out on the floor and he needed me to play the role of the bandage. So I blinked once, tilted my head, and said very clearly, "He isn't lying, Julian. He's telling the absolute truth." The room exploded, not with noise, but with the sheer force of the tension snapping. Julian went pale, then red, then a sickly shade of gray. "You," he stammered, the word coming out like a broken piece of glass. "You cheated on me with him." I leaned back, smoothing the front of my silk dress. "About the same time you started staying late for those budget meetings with Sophia," I said softly. "Remember those? The ones where you had to turn your phone off so you wouldn't be disturbed?" His eyes widened. "The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. But before you decide you know who I am, before you judge me for the move I made, I need to take you back. Because that dinner wasn't the start of the story. It was the execution. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand what Julian did first. 1 month ago, Julian left his laptop unlocked on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. We had a marriage built on a foundation of don't ask, don't tell, which I had mistaken for trust. But I was looking for a recipe I'd saved, and when I touched the trackpad, the screen flickered to life. He hadn't just left his email open, he'd left a chat window active. A name I knew appeared: Sophia. She was a junior analyst at his firm, young, hungry, and according to Julian's previous descriptions, bit of a nuisance. The messages told a different story. Can't wait for Thursday, Sophia had written. Make sure you wear that blue suit. It's easier to take off. I felt a cold sensation wash over me, starting at the base of my skull and working its way down my spine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept scrolling. I found 6 months of history. 6 months of hotel bookings, flirty selfies, and detailed plans for a life they were building in the shadows. But the cheating wasn't the part that broke me. I could have handled a physical betrayal. What destroyed me was the way he talked about me. How's the roommate? Sophia had asked in one thread. She's fine, Julian had replied. Useful. She keeps the house running like a Swiss watch. Honestly, it's like having a high-end concierge that I don't have to tip. She has the personality of a damp paper towel, but she's stable. I sat on the sofa, the light from the laptop screen casting a ghostly blue glow over my face. My hands were shaking, but my mind was becoming terrifyingly clear. When are you going to drop her? Sophia asked. As soon as her promotion goes through, Julian wrote back. The bonus structure at her firm is massive this year. If I file now, I get nothing. If I wait until January, I walk away with half of that payout. My lawyer says we just need to keep her happy for 3 more months. Then I'm all yours, and we'll have the seed money for that place in the Hamptons. Useful, stable, a payout. I wasn't a wife to him. I was an asset. I was an investment he was waiting to mature before he cashed out. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw his clothes off the balcony. Instead, I took screenshots of every single message. I documented the bank transfers he'd been making to a hidden account. I recorded the disparaging comments he made about my intelligence and my worth. And then I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, and started making the dinner he liked. I greeted him with a smile when he came home. I let him kiss my cheek. And that night, while he slept, I started planning. The first thing I did was call Clara Sterling. Clara was Julian's ex-fiancée from 7 years ago. Their breakup had been legendary, loud, messy, and centered around a misunderstanding that I now realized was just Julian's standard operating procedure. We met at a dim, out-of-the-way tea house. Clara looked at me with a mixture of pity and recognition. I wondered when you'd call, she said, her voice like gravel. I saw the photos of you two on social media. You looked so happy. I almost felt guilty for not warning you. Tell me everything, I said. And she did. She told me how Julian had gaslit her, how he'd siphoned money from their joint accounts to fund his lifestyle, and how he'd tried to paint her as unstable to their mutual friends. When she finally caught him, he doesn't just leave. Clara warned me. He harvests. He finds women who are stable, as he likes to say, and he stays until he's taken everything he can use. Then he burns the bridge while you're still standing on it. He wants my promotion bonus, I told her. Clara laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Of course he does. He's probably already got the divorce papers drafted, just waiting for the date on your check. That was the turning point. I realized that if I played by the rules, I would lose. If I filed for divorce normally, it would be a long, drawn-out battle where he would play the victim and try to take half of everything I'd worked for. I needed something more surgical. I needed to ruin his reputation, his financial safety net, and his ego all at once. That was where Elias Thorne came in. Elias wasn't my lover, not in the way Julian thought. Elias was an old friend from college, a man who valued truth above all else. When I told him what I'd found, he didn't offer me a shoulder to cry on. He offered me a weapon. He wants to make you a joke, Elias had asked, his eyes narrowing. Let's give him a punchline he'll never forget. We spent weeks setting the stage. I worked with a private investigator to track Julian's meetings with Sophia. I found out they weren't just having an affair. They were funneling company information to a competitor, a move that was not only unethical but highly illegal according to Julian's employment contract. Meanwhile, at work, I made a move Julian never saw coming. I went to my boss and told him I wanted to defer my promotion. I told him I needed to take a sabbatical for personal reasons, and that I wanted to move my bonus into a trust for my parents. Legally, The money was no longer part of our marital assets. It was gone before Julian even knew it existed. The weeks leading up to the anniversary dinner were a masterclass in acting. I played the part of the useful roommate to perfection. I listened to him talk about his day. I congratulated him on his hard work. And I watched him look at me with that condescending smirk, thinking he was the predator and I was the prey. Then came the night of the dinner. Back in the dining room, the silence was still heavy. Julian was staring at me, his mouth working but no sound coming out. The guests were gone. They'd practically tripped over themselves to get out of the apartment once they realized the spark was actually a forest fire. "You're lying," Julian finally choked out. "You and Thorne. You're just saying this to get back at me for the joke." "It wasn't a joke, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as deep sea water. "You meant every word. You think I'm boring. You think I'm mechanical. You think I'm a payout." I reached into the sideboard and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the wood, knocking over his wine glass. The red liquid pooled around it like blood. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Evidence," I said. "Screenshots of your chats with Sophia, receipts from the hotel in Midtown, and most importantly, the documentation of the proprietary files you sent to Sophia's personal email to help her get that job at the rival firm." Julian's face went a ghostly, translucent white. "Celine, wait, I'm not finished," I said. "I know about the divorce attorney you hired 3 weeks ago. I know you were waiting for my promotion bonus. So, I thought you should know, I turned it down. I'm taking a 6-month unpaid leave of absence starting Monday. There is no payout. There is no seed money for your house in the Hamptons. There is only a very long, very expensive legal battle that you are going to lose." Elias stood up slowly. He looked at Julian with a mixture of disgust and pity. "You should probably check your work email too, Julian. I took the liberty of forwarding those files to your HR department an hour ago. I imagine security is waiting for you to come in and collect your things." Julian slumped into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in 5 years, he looked exactly like the man he was, a hollow shell held together by expensive suits and other people's labor. "You ruined me," he whispered. "No," I said, standing up and walking toward the door. "I just stopped being useful. I walked out of that apartment with nothing but my handbag. I had a suitcase already waiting in a locker downtown. I didn't look back at the glass box in the sky. I didn't look back at the man who thought silence was a sign of weakness." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal filings and professional fallout. Julian was fired, of course. The firm didn't just let him go. They sued him for breach of contract. Sophia disappeared the moment the money dried up, moving on to her next resource. I moved into a small, sun-drenched apartment in a part of the city where no one knew my name. I spent my mornings drinking coffee on a balcony that didn't overlook a skyline, but a quiet park. I learned that silence doesn't have to be a mask. It can be a sanctuary. One evening, about 6 months later, I was sitting at a small bistro reading a book. A shadow fell over the table. I looked up and saw Julian. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was thinning, and he had a desperate, haunted look in his eyes. He looked like a man who had spent 6 months realizing that without someone to reflect his own greatness back at him, he didn't really exist. "Celine," he said, his voice cracking, "please, I just want to talk." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hurt, no desire for revenge, just the mild curiosity you feel when you see a character from a movie you barely remember. "I have nothing to say to you, Julian," I said calmly. "I've changed," he pleaded, leaning over the table. "I realized what I lost. I realized that you were the only real thing in my life. I was stupid. I was arrogant. But we can fix it. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm getting my life back together. Just one dinner. That's all I'm asking." I closed my book and looked him straight in the eyes. "Julian, do you remember what you said at our anniversary dinner? About the assembly instructions?" He flinched. "I was drunk," I didn't mean it actually, I said, a small smile touching my lips. You were right about one thing. I do like things to be level. I do like to follow a process. And the final step in the manual for our marriage was very clear. He looked hopeful for a split second. What was it? Dispose of all toxic materials, I said. And I've already completed that step. I stood up, paid my bill, and walked away. I didn't look back to see if he was watching. I didn't need to. I was busy looking at the sunset, thinking about the fact that for the first time in my life, I wasn't anyone's useful roommate. I wasn't anyone's stable investment. I was Celine Vane, and I was finally, beautifully, completely on my own. The days that followed that final encounter felt lighter, as if I had physically shed a weight I'd been carrying for a decade. I went back to work, but on my own terms. I accepted the promotion, but I negotiated for a role that allowed me to mentor younger women, teaching them how to spot the Julians of the world before they got too close. Elias and I remained friends, but we never became lovers. The fire he described at the dinner had been a lie, a necessary one to break Julian's ego, but we both knew that our connection was built on something better, a mutual understanding of what it means to take your life back. I often think about that night at the dining table. Sometimes I still hear the sound of Julian's glass breaking, but I don't feel the cold anymore. I feel the warmth of the sun on my face. I feel the strength in my own hands. My name is Celine Vane. I'm 35 now, and I finally realized that my life didn't split into a before and an after. It just finally began. The city is loud and the world is messy, but in the quiet of my own home, the air is clean. No stage makeup, no scripts, no manuals, just me, and that is more than enough. I think back to that copper taste in my mouth, the metallic tang of suppressed rage. It's gone now, replaced by the simple, sweet reality of a life built by my own hands. Julian had thought he was the architect of my reality, but he was just a squatter in a house I had built. When I finally evicted him, I didn't just reclaim the space. I renovated the whole damn thing. I remember a specific morning, months after the divorce was finalized. I was standing in my new kitchen, the sun streaming through the window, hitting a stack of books on the counter. There was no one to tell me the floors weren't shiny enough, no one to mock my interests or tell me my personality was damp. I realized then that the silence I had once feared wasn't an empty void. It was a canvas. I started painting again, a hobby Julian had laughed out of me years ago. I started traveling to places he'd deemed too boring or not prestigious enough. I rediscovered the version of myself that existed before I tried to shrink to fit inside his narrow expectations. And as for Julian, I heard through the grapevine that he moved back in with his parents. His reputation in the city was effectively charred beyond recognition. Sophia, as expected, didn't stick around for the fallout. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of mirrors, and once I broke the glass, there was nothing left but the distorted reflections of his own ego. Clara and I still meet for tea occasionally. We don't talk about him much anymore. We talk about our businesses, our lives, the ways we've grown. We are two women who were meant to be, harvested, who instead decided to become the ones who grow the garden. I've learned that the most powerful thing a person can do is to refuse to be the punchline, to refuse to be the background noise in someone else's performance. When people ask me now how I'm doing, I don't give them a polished, scripted answer. I don't tell them I'm fine. I tell them the truth. I tell them I'm free. And for the first time in my 35 years, I know exactly what that means. It means waking up and knowing that the only person I have to impress is the woman looking back at me in the mirror. It means knowing that my value isn't tied to a bonus structure or a domestic routine. It means knowing that if I ever choose to let someone into my life again, it won't be because I'm useful. It will be because they are worthy of the fire I've spent a lifetime learning how to tend. The before was a long, slow sleep. The after is a wide awake world. And I wouldn't trade a single second of the struggle it took to get here. I think about the IKEA joke Julian told. the one about following instructions. I realized he was right in a way. I was following instructions, but they weren't for a bookshelf. They were for a bomb, and I'm glad I had the courage to let it go off. Because sometimes you have to level the house to see the view, and the view from here is spectacular. I spent the next year leaning into the discomfort of total independence. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To spend so long defined by a partnership, even a bad one, that when it's gone, you feel like you're floating in zero gravity. I had to relearn the weight of my own decisions. I had to learn that if the coffee was cold, it was my fault, but I also didn't have to apologize to anyone for it. I remember the first time I went to a party after the anniversary disaster. It was a gallery opening for a friend of Elias. I walked in alone, wearing a dress that Julian would have called too loud. I felt a brief flash of the old Celine, the one who would have scanned the room for his approval, who would have adjusted her posture to make him look better. But that Celine was gone. I walked to the bar, ordered a drink I actually liked, and spent the evening talking to strangers about art, politics, and the weather. I didn't perform. I didn't act as a buffer for anyone's ego. I was just there, present, solid. Someone asked me what my husband did for a living. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and said, "I don't have a husband. I have a life." The look of confusion on their face was the best compliment I'd ever received. I've also learned a lot about the nature of betrayal. It's not a single event, it's a process. Julian didn't betray me at that dinner. He had been betraying me every day for years. Every time he dismissed my ideas, every time he mocked my passions, every time he treated my support as his birthright. The affair with Sophia was just the most obvious symptom of a much deeper rot. I realized that by staying, I had been betraying myself. I had been complicit in my own disappearance. The after isn't just about being away from him. It's about being back to myself. It's about the fact that I no longer bite my tongue until it bleeds. I no longer measure my words to ensure they don't bruise a man's fragile sense of self. One rainy Tuesday, I found an old photo of us in a box of books. We were standing on a beach, smiling. I looked at the woman in the photo, Celine at 29, and I felt a deep sense of grief for her. She was so eager to please. She was so convinced that if she just worked hard enough, she could make a happy home out of a pile of lies. I didn't burn the photo. I just put it back in the box. It's part of the map of how I got here. You can't hate the road for being bumpy if it's the only path that leads to the ocean. My career thrived in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant energy drain of managing Julian's moods and expectations, I had a surplus of focus. I led projects that I used to think were out of my league. I spoke at conferences where I used to think I'd be ignored. And every time I stepped onto a stage, I remembered Julian's voice saying I was boring as a damp towel. I used that voice as fuel, not because I still cared what he thought, but because it reminded me of the version of myself I would never be again. The apartment I live in now is full of things Julian would have hated. Bright colors, mismatched furniture, and a persistent smell of oil paints and fresh herbs. It's not refined. It's not a showpiece. It's a home. I've had a few dates. Some were good, some were mediocre, and some were reminders of why I'm in no rush. I'm looking for something that Julian could never understand, a partnership of equals. I'm looking for someone who doesn't need me to be stable or useful, but who wants me to be exactly who I am. And until then, I have my work. I have my friends. I have my silence. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the rain is tapping against the glass, I think about that anniversary dinner. I think about the look on Julian's face when Elias said those words. Poor, unadulterated fire. Elias was right, though not in the way he meant. I am fire. I spent years letting Julian try to contain me in a hearth, using me to keep himself warm while he complained about the smoke. But fire isn't meant to be contained. It's meant to burn. I burned down the life he built for us, and in the ashes, I found the woman I was always meant to be. My name is Celine Vane. I'm 36 now. and I am no longer waiting for the instructions. I'm writing the book myself. The world is wide, the future is unwritten, and for the first time in my life, I am not afraid of the dark, because I know how to make my own light. I think back to that evening, the saffron and the lamb, the crystal and the mahogany. It feels like a dream now, a gilded cage I used to call a home. I realize that the most dangerous thing about a cage isn't the bars, it's the food. Julian kept me fed with just enough affection and just enough stability to keep me from trying the door. But once I realized the food was poisoned, the cage didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a trap. I've seen Julian one more time since that bistro meeting. I was walking through the park, and I saw him sitting on a bench. He didn't see me. He was staring at his phone, his shoulders slumped, looking older than his years. He looked like a man who was still looking for someone to tell him who he was. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept walking, my boots clicking against the pavement in a steady, confident rhythm. Because the after isn't about him. It was never about him. It was always about the moment I decided that my life was worth more than a payout. It was about the moment I decided that being useful was a prison, and being myself was the only way to be free. The story of Celine and Julian didn't end with a divorce decree. It ended the moment I stopped caring about his version of the story. I am the architect, I am the fire, and I am finally beautifully, gloriously alive. Looking back, I realized that everyone at that table, Marcus, Tessa, Monica, and the rest, were just spectators in a play I didn't know I was starring in. They saw the perfect couple, because that's what we showed them. We are all so busy curating the highlights of our lives that we often fail to notice when the foundation is rotting right beneath our feet. I don't blame them for laughing at Julian's jokes. They didn't know the context. They didn't see the screenshots. They didn't know that the woman they saw as a stable roommate was actually a woman on the verge of a revolution. I've made new friends now, people who don't care about blue chip marriages or seed money for the Hamptons. We talk about things that matter, fear, ambition, the way the light hits the buildings at 5 o'clock in the evening. We talk about the mistakes we've made and the lessons we've learned the hard way. And sometimes, when we're feeling particularly brave, we talk about the before. I told one friend about the IKEA joke a few weeks ago. We were sitting on my balcony, drinking wine out of mismatched tumblers. She didn't laugh. She just looked at me and said, "I'm glad you broke the instructions, Celine." "Me too," I said, "because life isn't a bookshelf. It's not something you can assemble in a weekend with a hex key and a set of diagrams. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes you end up with extra pieces that you don't know what to do with. But as long as it's yours, as long as you're the one who decided where the screws go, it's beautiful." I look at my hands. They're a little stained with paint today. My hair is a little messy. My life is a little unrefined. And I've never been happier. Julian wanted a woman he could set a stopwatch to. He wanted a woman who was mechanical and predictable. He wanted a tool. What he got was a woman who was a hurricane. He just didn't realize it until the roof was already gone. I hope he finds what he's looking for. I really do. I hope he finds someone who is willing to play the role he's written. But I have a feeling he's going to find that the world is running out of women who are willing to be useful at the expense of their own souls. The era of the stable roommate is over. The era of Celine Vane has just begun, and as I sit here watching the city lights begin to flicker on, I realize that the spark Marcus asked about all those months ago wasn't something Julian and I had together. It was something I had inside me all along. Julian just tried to smother it. But fire is a tricky thing. The more you try to crush it, the hotter it burns. And I am burning brighter than ever. The night is long. The city is loud, and I am exactly where I need to be. No more masks. No more stage makeup. Just the truth. And the truth is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I think about the next 5 years. Where will I be? What will I be doing? I don't know. And for the first time in my life, that doesn't scare me. Because whatever happens, I know I'll be the one making the decisions. I'll be the one writing the story. I'll be the one following my own heart, not a manual. And that is the only instruction I'll ever need again. I remember the way Julian used to talk about the future. It was always a series of transactions. When we get this, once we have that, if we hit this milestone. He saw life as a ladder, and I was just one of the rungs. I don't see life as a ladder anymore. I see it as an ocean. There are tides, there are storms, and there are moments of absolute, breathtaking calm. You can't climb an ocean. You have to learn how to swim. Julian is still trying to climb. He's still looking for the next rung, the next payout, the next person to use. He's going to spend his whole life trying to get to the top, only to realize that there is no top. There is only the climb. I'm done climbing. I'm swimming now, and the water is perfect. I think about Sophia sometimes too. I wonder if she's happy. I wonder if she's found a new man to help her with her career. Part of me wants to warn her, to tell her that Julian is a mirror who will eventually turn into a vacuum. But another part of me knows that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I had to learn it. Clara had to learn it. Maybe Sophia needs to learn it too. Or maybe she's exactly like him. Maybe they deserve each other. Two people looking for a shortcut to a life they didn't earn. Either way, it's not my story anymore. I've turned the page. I've started a new chapter. And in this chapter, the protagonist doesn't need a husband to tell her she's incredible. She knows it because she's seen what she can survive. She knows it because she's seen what she can build. She knows it because she's the one who held the matches. The city is quiet now. The rain has stopped. I can see the moon reflected in the windows of the skyscraper across the street. It's a cold, distant light, but it's steady. I feel a sense of peace that I can't quite describe. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of self. I am Celine Vane. I am 37 tomorrow, and I am exactly who I was always meant to be. Before the anniversary, before the dinner, before Julian, I am me, and that is the most satisfying end I could have ever imagined. But then again, it's not an end at all. It's just the beginning. I think about the many versions of me that have existed. The girl who wanted to be an artist. The young woman who fell in love with a man she thought was her hero. The wife who tried to be perfect. The woman who realized she was being hunted. All of them led me here. All of them are part of the fire. And as I close my eyes and let the silence of my home wrap around me like a blanket, I know that I am finally safe. Not because the world is kind, and not because I have a stable life. I am safe because I am my own sanctuary, and no one, not Julian, not Sophia, not anyone, can ever take that away from me again. The instructions are gone, the manual is burned, the fire is steady, and the view is everything. I think about the word useful one last time. Julian used it as an insult, a way to categorize me as an appliance rather than a person. But as I look around my life now, I realize that being useful isn't a bad thing. I am useful to my friends. I am useful to my community. I am useful to the young women I mentor. The difference is, I am no longer being used. I am the one who decides how my energy is spent. I am the one who decides who gets to benefit from my stability and my strength. I am no longer a resource to be extracted. I am a source, and a source never runs dry. The clock on the wall ticks quietly. It's midnight, my birthday. Happy birthday, Celine, I whisper to the empty room. You made it. You didn't just survive the after. You created it. And it is more beautiful than anything you ever dreamed of in the before. The lights of the city continue to twinkle, a million stories happening at once. But mine is the only one I'm listening to now. And for the first time, I love the way it sounds. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like fire. It sounds like me. And that is more than enough. It's everything.